Hello and welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this next interview. Now, transatlantic relations face renewed scrutiny after tensions around Iran and the disruption of shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, prompting calls from Washington for allied involvement. European responses have varied, reflecting different legal interpretations, strategic priorities, and domestic constraints. And this also highlights broader question about alliance expectations and decision-making within NATO. Joining us today on TVP World to explore these issues is Garvan Walshe, CEO of Article 7 Intelligence for Democrats, a foreign policy expert specializing in European security and transatlantic relations. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hello, good evening.
So we're looking at this call to action from the Trump administration and the subsequent reluctance of European countries. What does this broadly coordinated refusal tell us about, transatlantic relations as a whole?
Well, I mean, the thing is, nobody thinks Trump sticks to his agreements. So even if we were able to give Trump something here, there's no guarantee we'd get anything back in return. He's shown himself to be so unreliable over the years that Europeans aren't quite sure why it's worth sending ships into harm's way to help him get out of a mess he created.
Right, but wouldn't it be also an argument that it is in Europe's own strategic interest as well to see the shipping lane reopen, as the Strait of Hormuz and its subsequent closure does have an impact globally?
That's true. It's just the United States has far greater capability to do this. If there's any way to actually open the Strait of Hormuz, it would need a serious military operation, and it's not something really that's within Europe's capability. I don't think it would be any way easy for Europe to do, and I think that it's even going to be difficult for the United States to do because of the situation that it's got into. Unless you can achieve agreement from the Iranians, you're going to have to find some way of controlling both sides of those straits. That's a lot of territory, and you're going to need very large forces to do it. Alternatively, you can try and escort tankers, but that's very intensive, and we don't really have the number of ships that we used to do in the 1980s, when the last time this kind of thing was attempted.
All right. Now, previously, when the U.S. called on for European help for crises such as in Iraq and subsequently Afghanistan, the NATO allies mostly actually joined in, and even Poland, not a NATO member back then, also backed the U.S. action. What makes this case different from the previous instances?
Well, in the case of Afghanistan, we saw the United States was attacked on 9/11, and we wanted to help them. We thought they had a just cause in trying to capture Osama bin Laden, defeat the Taliban, and try and establish a better form of government in Afghanistan. In Iraq, Europe was divided. Britain, and Poland joined the American operation. France and Germany did not. There was disagreement over whether war was necessary and whether it was the best way of dealing with Saddam Hussein. And in this case, although Europeans aren't fans of the Iranian regime and are kind of looking the other way as it's getting pummeled from the air, they don't see any particular reason to help Trump get out of this particular mess. While it's quite clear, I think, that the Israelis have a plan to weaken, or if not replace, the regime in Tehran, it's very hard to understand what Trump is really doing. He changes his mind day by day, perhaps even tweet by tweet, and it's difficult to know whether he has the resolve for a continued campaign, whether he wants to cut and run, and it's extremely difficult to make any kind of pledges of support in those situations because we don't know what we would be supporting.
How important do you think the transactional nature of Trump's administration is shaping the current European responses?
Well, a lot of people say he's transactional, but he's not transactional. He's just unreliable. In a transactional administration, we might be able to do a deal like the one the Finnish president suggested, where we could say, okay, we can help you in Hormuz if you'll help us in Ukraine. But the thing is, we don't really trust him to actually help us in Ukraine. So we're not able to engage in a transaction. Trump just sees anyone trying to help him as a sign of weakness, and then he treats any point of leverage as a point for extortion. So it's really difficult to make practical arrangements with these kind of transactions with such an individual.
Now, after having been rebutted by most European countries, Trump has came out and say that we don't really need the help from European allies, but it would be nice if you do. how much of it do you think it's kind of walking back its call for action? And well, he also mentioned, is he right or not when he says that he suspected NATO will not come to the aid of the United States, or is this action more targeted towards him personally?
Well, I mean, NATO doesn't have an obligation to help NATO members that start wars on their own. It also doesn't have an obligation to act outside Europe and the North Atlantic. This is out of area, and it's a war started by the United States. So there's no NATO obligation. Now, should individual members, NATO members, try and help the United States? Perhaps they can make those kind of decisions, but at the moment it's not clear why that would be particularly helpful. It's not clear what they would get out of it. And we're more likely to end up being left high and dry by a very unreliable Trump administration and very unreliable Donald Trump. We don't know whether he's just going to try and leave the field, leave oil prices high, or whether he's going to try and seize some territory, whether he's going to try and continue bombing for a few weeks and see what happens. It's very unclear. He hasn't been communicating any of his war aims really to anybody, whether it's allies or the American public. They seem to shift very frequently, even hour by hour. And under those circumstances, it's very hard to see the mission having any kind of success because we're not even sure what they're trying to do.
Right now, how credible are the signals from the United States about potentially scaling back or even pulling out of NATO?
Well, they're not credible. No signals from the United States are credible right now. That's the problem. They're unable to signal anything consistently. So we don't know whether they want to stay. We don't know whether they want to go. So in those circumstances, it's quite rational to let the Americans finally arrive at a course of action, and then perhaps we can make a rational decision about whether to support it or not. Right now, it's too unpredictable. And what Trump says is not a particularly good guide to what he does anyway, but what he's saying is itself so unreliable. It's not even that he's consistently deceiving anyone, it just seems that he doesn't actually know what he's doing.
There's also an interesting phenomenon that we've been observing that some of the stronger Trump-aligned parties within Europe are actually quite muted when it comes to the response in this particular incident. And even politicians who's usually on his side also doesn't really want to have any input. What do you think is the contributing factor?
I think a lot of it is the sheer uncertainty about what this war is for, and Trump's failure to make a case for it, even to Trump-aligned people, even to politicians who are very skeptical of the Iranian regime and want to see them weakened or replaced if possible. There are plenty of people in Europe who are worried about the Iranian nuclear program, worried about Iran's sponsorship of terrorism, worried about their role in the Middle East causing instability. But they don't see this kind of incoherent campaign as a solution to that. So many people are just trying to keep as low profile as they possibly can, hope it blows over, and then they can try and have some kind of relationship with the administration if they feel they're aligned with him on other kind of domestic ideology questions, whether it's nationalism, hostility to immigration, suspicion of the European Union. There are, right-wing Europeans who would like to be aligned with Trump, but he's making it very difficult for them to be aligned with Trump right now.
Now, recently, the German foreign minister came out and spoke about pretty much in favor of a regime change and seeing it as a desirable outcome. There's also a lot of political leaders echoing the similar sentiment. However, they do not want to see things done the way it is. Do you think that there is any sort of compromise that could be reached, any other strategic way that European nations can go about tackling this, perhaps having some sort of input so things aren't just left in the Americans' hands?
I mean, at the beginning of this war, it looked like the Israelis in particular were pursuing a strategy of attacking regime targets, trying to weaken the security apparatus of the regime, and working quite creatively to create conditions that could have allowed a popular uprising to, have some chance. They were targeting Kurdish areas, so they were specifically targeting security infrastructure in Kurdish areas in the hope that Kurdish militias would rise up. That seems to be much more extensive than is generally reported, and maybe having some kind of success. But the Iranian people who rose up in January and were massacred by the tens of thousands are being very wary about joining anything like this because they're worried that they could get abandoned, just like everybody else is, because Trump can't be relied on to stick the course. So even if the Israelis are keen to undermine the Iranian regime, and would like to see a change in regime, they will probably accept a weaker regime, whereas the Iranian people can't afford to face off against even a weaker Iranian regime. As for European countries, yes, we would all like to see a different regime in Iran, but this current war, the way it's being planned, is just too haphazard, too confused to stand a chance of success. It seems that Trump was trying to replicate what he did in Venezuela, where you replace the leader and find a new one. But Iran is a much more institutional place than Venezuela is. This is a revolutionary regime that's been going on for 40 years. It's a bit like religious form of the Soviet Union. It's not a personalist kind of dictatorship. So they have replacements. They have army organizations. They have a Praetorian Guard and the IRGC. They are able to withstand these kind of individual swapping outs of people. Whether they're able to withstand the assassination campaign that Israel is actually waging on their leadership, including Ali Larijani, the sort of interim leader and former chief nuclear negotiator, the head of the Basij militia, which is very important for suppressing popular discontent in Iran, and also the intelligence chief, have all been assassinated in the last 48 hours. Whether the regime is able to continue to resist that is an interesting question. It's also quite astonishing that the Israelis are still able to target these people now that they don't have the advantage of surprise. Clearly, they have significant intelligence assets that are penetrating the Iranian regime here, which suggests levels of weakness that go up higher than many people might have suspected. But with the haphazard American involvement, it's hard to see how this is going to actually lead to anything that's predictable enough for other powers to want to get involved. And they'd rather just leave this to the Israelis, the Americans, the Gulf states, and see where it goes.
And of course, that's also going to have an impact with the transatlantic relation going forward as well. But we'll have to see how that turns out. In the meantime, thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Cheers. And thank you for tuning into this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.